Hello, everyone. I'm Margot Wolny, and I'm happy to welcome you to another episode of UI5ers Live. This time, we'll take you through the entire process of creating a custom UI5 web component and integrating it seamlessly into your application, making it feel like a native OpenUI5 control. And yeah, to guide us through this topic and share their expertise, we have two experts joining us, and this is Ian Myung-Yun. Hello, Ian.
Hello.
And Thorsten Hochreuter. Hi, Thorsten.
Hello.
Yeah, and of course, no session is complete without our familiar faces. Stefan Beck.
Hi, all.
Peter Müsig.
Hi, everyone.
And Andreas Kunz.
Hello.
Yeah, and with this, let's get started. Ian, please go ahead.
All right. So, hello, everybody. My name is Johan, and I'm part of the Web Components team. And in the next roughly 10 minutes, we'll create a web component together. So you may know that there are plenty of web components available, so you can use them, but there could be also cases that your design, your use case require not so common web component, and then you may decide to create your own web component. And it will be actually a clever decision because of the reusable nature of the web components. Because once a component is built as a web component, it can be used basically in any web framework, from React to Angular and including SAP UI5. So then the journey goes through our development section, but I don't have to read that, so let's just get started. And the nice part is that you're not alone at all. We offer great tools to speed up the development process. Basically, there is a single command, npm init web components package, that will generate a project for you with everything you need to start right away developing a web component, from development server to testing setup, teaming setup, etc. So let's run the command. Once the command runs, it asks for a package name or a project name. So let's use UI5ers live for that. And then for a component name. So let's create a UI5 token today. And then that's it. The project is already generated. So now the prompt asks us to install the dependencies and then start the server. And I already did that. So I installed the dependencies so I can basically fast forward to save some time and just start the development server. After it starts, we will see a test page. It takes a few seconds and we'll be able to see our first web component. So let's check the elements view. So here it is, the command created for us a web component, and this test page already renders it. It uses the MyUI5 token tag, and for now it displays a div with some simple styles and basic functionality. In this case, it's just a counter that increments upon clicking it. But moreover, we already have the theming setup so that we can play around. For example, to see how our component or the component you develop may look like in different teams, because it's likely you to also have to support multiple teams. And also we have translation setup in place. Okay, so let's then jump to the code and start coding. Before coding, maybe a few words about the project that is generated. So the first thing to mention is that it's configured as a package. So it has a package JSON. And what this means is that once you're done with developing your web component, you can publish it in an NPM repository and then consume it from there. We have the test page that you saw just a second ago, And here it is, our tag. This is how we use the web components. They're like a pure HTML elements. And the most important development happens in the source folder. That's why I will focus on it. So we have three key files. One is the class. It was generated, my UI5 token class. And you will notice that it's a TypeScript file, it's a TypeScript project, so we will benefit from all known TypeScript features and like static code checks and etc. to improve the dev experience and also the code quality. You will notice also that we leverage the TypeScript decorators for defining our components, the properties of our components, but we'll come to this a bit later. So basically, this is the class of our web component. This is the logic that stays behind. The second key part is the template of our component, basically the markup that is rendered. Currently, it's a div with some text. This is a handlebars template. So currently, we support only handlebars for templates, but for the future, we plan also to add support for JSX and TSX templates as well. And you will notice that we can for sure use the state of our component here. These counter text and count are part of our class. The count is a property, counter text is a getter. So basically the context of this template is the instance of the component that is rendered. And the third key part is the styles of the component, my UI5 token CSS. And here, of course, goes our styles. But I'd like to say a few words about our teaming, how it's organized, because it's also an important concept. And it's that our teaming is based on CSS variables entirely. And there is a single CSS file that will be used for all teams. And the differences between teams, because it's likely to support multiple teams, should be extracted as parameters and then defined for each team. For example, we declared a CSS variable. We say that in high contrast white it should be black. Then we say for high contrast black it should be white, and etc. So all CSS rules goes inside a single file, and then differences goes inside files per team. So this is how our teaming is organized. All right, so let's then start coding. Okay, for now we have this initial web component that's auto-generated, and we are going to create a simple token web component from here. And the first thing is let's make a cleanup because we won't use all these parts here. Okay. Or just command it right here. So the first thing is that I want to use slots because this is also a very powerful concept in web components. You may think of slots as aggregations, or the general definition is that there are places that applications can put a random HTML or just plain text nodes inside, and you can define where exactly to be located. So we now change the template of our file. We add the slot element. This is how we can use the slots. And then we go to our test page, and we can then just say, I don't know, token with some text. Let's be healthy. Let's have some more, and I don't know, something like that, and just see what's rendered. And it's not surprising. It's just plain text because this is what we defined in our template. So let's build upon it and make it, let's say, more beautiful. Here I have also this tutorial, which is very handy because I can also put some styles that I prepared for this session. Okay, so let's see now how it looks. So, okay, we have some border, we have some background, so it became a little bit better. And the next requirement, let's say imaginary requirement, is to have a close or remove icon on the side, because I might want to remove some tokens. So I want to display an icon on the side. So to render an icon, you can just use the available icons from our icon set. For example, I will use a decline icon, and also I need the icon web component as well to display the icon. Important thing to note is that whenever we use other web components inside our web component, so to say a composition, we need to also define it as a dependency. And this will ensure that the icon web component that we are using will be defined before our my UI5 token web component, and everything will look perfectly. So now that we import the icon web component and the icon itself, the decline icon, we can use it in our templates after the text. So here comes the text from outside. Then we can just use our icon, import the decline one. And I think it had this mode interactive down it. And okay, let's check now. So we have now the icon. It's not yet aligned, so probably we need to also add some styles to make it better.
Maybe just to also quickly interrupt. So in HBS, we also notice why, for example, the evolution to TSX is so interesting, because then we get in future also automatically the code completion for all these components. This will be a nice step forward.
Yes, it's a step forward. Also this like code completion, and also this error messages and everything. Yeah, validation. Yeah. So let's also put some styles to align the icon, nothing special. Okay. I need this class. So basically the host selector is targeting the custom element itself, the tag. While if you have some classes, then you need to also put the classes whenever you want to be applied. So in this case, I want to style the div element. And let's now see. Yeah, it looks nicely aligned now. All right. So then I also want to show how to make a conditional rendering based on the state of our component and use some of the decorators. So here we have the counter, but in my case, for the token, I need another one, another property. So by default, our properties are from type string, but I need a Boolean property called read-only. And I want to hint the framework that it will be a Boolean property so that it knows how to map attributes to properties. And here it is. So now I can also use this read-only property in my template. In this case, I will say that unless this is a read-only, I want to have the icon. So if it's a read-only, the icon won't be displayed, and the opposite. So let's also change a bit our index.html, and for example, to make the third one read-only, just for the demo, right? And also see what happens. So as you saw, the first two has the icon, and the third one not. And the other thing to point out when using the property decorators to define your properties, this also hints the framework that it should re-render our components whenever the value of this property changes. So for example, if I now go and remove the read-only property from here. You see the component has been re-rendered and the icon was displayed. All right, and one more thing that I would like to add also is an event, because events are important for application developers to react on some changes. And I would like to fire an event whenever someone clicks the close icon of the token. So let's use this method, but this time I would like to fire an event. There is a base method for that called fire event, and I can just put some name. Also, there is a event decorator that also defines the events of the web components. This is the other part. It's too fast. So now I also have to bind this click handler to my icon, which is in the template. So the handlebars has this click, and then I can put the...
So the add in front of this attribute indicates that it's the event binding. So this is described in lit, right? This is a lit feature.
Yes.
As we are using lit HTML for the real render later on.
Yes, one thing that I didn't mention is that you are writing handlebars here, but underneath we are transforming or compiling this template to a lit template, because lit HTML is the library that we are using for the rendering. Yes.
And this directive, so unless is a handlebars directive, and we can use all standard directives like if, unless, or whatever, or there is a for also in that to make this logic in the template.
Okay, so now that we add this listener to the click of the icon, we also have the handler that is saying my component, the UI5 token, is firing this delete event. The last piece is that we can listen for this delete event. And this is the, let's say, the native DOM method, add event listener for the delete, and just alerting a message. And this is the ID of the first UI5 token web component. So if everything was done properly, yes, we can see the alert. All right, so more or less, I think you got the idea of developing. You have the command to set up the project. You have also test setup, ESLint setup. But the more important part is how to use the template, how to add your styles, and then how to use these decorators to form your API, your properties, your slots, and how to fire in events. And also this showed how to also use other web components inside your web component. Now, also the second part, Torsten will show how this web component that was built customly by you can be used in a SAP UI5 application.
Good. So yeah, my name is Torsten. So thanks for having me. Also, thanks to Ilhan for providing us with a token web component. And I'm going to now walk you through how you can integrate such a web component into your UI5 application in the most seamless way. So if you look on the left side here, a little bit of explanation. You can see there is a couple of folders. One of them is my UI5 token, which is exactly what Ilhan just created. So imagine this was pushed into a repository. I checked it out. I have it now locally on my machine. And in a dev scenario, we're now going to include that locally available web component into your project. The project we're using is very simple. It's a blank UI5 application. It's called com.my.org.my.app. So there's no magic going on here. It's an index HTML file, a component.js, and an empty main view. And we're going to fill that main view with a bit of life. So let's start with the first things that are very basic, and that's the stuff that you need to do for any kind of project. So let's have a look at package.json. If you look down here in the bottom, you can see there are a couple of predefined dependencies that we already have included. Those are the UI5 Web Components base package and the Fiori package. Yeah, we're going to use a couple of those web components in our view later, but let's first include the web component that Ilhan provided. So the basic idea here is that since this is now NPM based, you would install that web component or that package, well, like you would install any other npm dependency. And if you look down here in the terminal, essentially you just do an npm install, but in this case I'm using a local file URL, and it took a moment, but now you can see that npm has figured out the package name is my UI5 Web Component token, sorry, and then you have the file pointing one folder upwards and then into the folder that I just showed you. So this is the first thing you have to do. You have to get the dependencies into your project of the web components that you want to use, which is, well, kind of obvious. You do this for UI5 libraries also. If you want to use the SAP M library, you would have to maintain it in the manifest, etc. So the second thing that glues all of this together, that allows us to get the web component rendered in UI5 and to use it in XML views and controllers and so on, is the UI5 tooling modules. That's a tooling extension, and I'm not sure if Peter already showed you that in a previous talk, but I'm going to quickly mention this, what it does. So there's another easy install command. You just install it from the npm repository, and then you get it into your, in this case, dev dependencies, because we only need this to build our app, but it's not really a runtime dependency in this case. So as you can see, we now have a dependency on the UI5 tooling modules, which is a tooling extension. And if you look at the little pop over here, it already tells you what it does. It allows you to require npm package content or the node module content in an AMD-like fashion in UI5. And what that means, I will show you that later, but this is essentially what it does. It's available in version 3.16. It's publicly available. I think Peter can also put a link to the repository in the chat, so you can have a look at the code, so how we did all of this and how you can maybe contribute if you have things that maybe we missed, etc. So this is the first thing you do. You need the dependency for your web component, and then you need this tooling extension. And this tooling extension comes with a middleware, and that middleware can quite easily be configured in your YAML file, right? I have it out commented, so now I comment it in. It's very basic. So in your UI5 YAML, you most likely already have a server section. You probably also are using other custom middlewares like the live reload. You will see how that works shortly when I change my views and I do a save, and how the browser automatically reloads the page. But now we also include this UI5 tooling modules middleware. And this is the magic piece of code that glues everything together seamlessly. So now with everything set up, the only thing that is left to do is now implement our UI. So let's have a look at the view. So the view is very basic. There's nothing in here. I have a couple of steps that we walk through, but here's an empty panel. There's nothing in here. And we're going to put a couple of web components in here now. So if you look at the very top here, you can see that there are already a couple of namespaces defined for this view. And this is the common way how you get your XML view enriched with UI5 controls, right? So you can use controls or elements from the SAP UI core namespace. The MVC namespace, the model view controller, of course, is used for requiring the view class. That's the outer element here. And then the SAP M library as an example, which is bringing us the page and the panel. In this case, it has an empty namespace, right? And the same pattern now also applies for your web component projects. That means if you use a namespace, in this case, let's use my, you can already see what the code completion wanted from me, but you can now just use an npm package name essentially for requiring that component. And then the middleware is now smart enough to figure out that once a component from inside that package is requested, it is served as an actual UI5 control to you. So let's start with the web component that Ilhan built. So it's obviously you need to use the namespace that you have just defined, like with any other control. And then the name of the web component is my UI5 token. And that is essentially already it. That should already lead to the point where you can now see something. But as Ilhan showed you, there's a text.
So this is now really important. This is the class name of the web component. It's not a tag. It's the class name you used in that package, like what the module name is, which is required later on.
So there is a difference between HTML DOM, where you have your web components natively, and that's how it will in the end look in the DOM. So when we look at the debugger, you can see that it looks exactly like Ilhan showed you. But here on the UI5 XML view, you're dealing with controls. And this is, I think, also the big takeaway here, that since you're now on the UI5 control level or on the control tree layer, you have to operate as if you have a control, which in the end you have. So when you define a text here and it says hello world, let's start with this. Start our dev server, which in this case is just the UI5 serve. It takes a moment, and then, yeah, you can already see now this is the same web component. You see the little icon here. You see the border that Ilhan just implemented. Now this is our token control, in this case, running in the UI5 app. And all it took for us was one dependency, and then, well, of course, you use the same pattern that you would use for any other XML view. So before we go into a couple of things in the XML, I also want to show you how you can do this programmatically, because what we can do is not only serve these web components declaratively in an XML view, you can also use them programmatically, for example, in your controller. Let's do this. So I commented in a panel here, that's the placeholder where we now will put in a button. All right, so the controller. Again, just short explanation, it's very simple. We have a basic JSON model with a greeting text. In this case, it says Hola Mundo, which is Spanish for hello world, but this is essentially it. So how would you use the control in JavaScript? Right? You would go ahead and type in the dependency name and then also use the corresponding variable name. So in this case, since we now want to maybe use a web component like a button from the base package, you can just name the npm package, and then you say, I want to use the button class, right? So we also need to put it up here as the runtime dependency, and now we can use that button. I already prepared a little bit of code that makes this work, so I just removed the comments here. As you can see, now we are again in the UI5 world, so that means you can instantiate a button with a constructor by calling new button. And then if you look at this object in here, this is your basic configuration object that you would pass to any other UI5 class. And that also means you can use things like bindings, right? So you can have data binding support. This obviously also works in XML, right? There's no difference here because the controls are instantiated in XML in the same way they are instantiated here in the controller. And then since we are, again, as I said, in the UI5 world, we have to grab our panel. Like this case, I gave the panel an ID, it's called button panel, and then you call add content, which is the API function that allows you to add this button control to the content aggregation of the panel. And then now, ideally, since we have a live reload working, stuff happens down here. And when you go over to the browser, you can already see that the page is refreshed. And now we have this little Hola Mundo button, but this time it was created programmatically. So this is the basic idea how you can get those things in. So what I normally do when I personally look for web components, because in the last time I built quite a number of things with web components, I start out at the playground. So this is also something that Ilhan quickly showed you, and we're going to have a look here, and I give you a couple of explanations what this playground and this component documentation does for you when you want to use it in UI5. So when you go to components here, you see two tabs mainly, or two, I know I call that these things, two tree entries, right? Main and Fiori. Those are the main packages that we already have in our dependency list in the application. So if you go to the main package, for example, and we look like for a cool control, because I think the color picker is a nice visual showcase, you can see that this is the name of the component, right? That's how you would write it in the DOM. But as Peter mentioned earlier, in UI5, you don't use the tag name of the web component, you use the class name. In this case, the class name would be color picker, right? So let's put a little color picker in our application. So we go back to our view. I already prepared a little panel, so it looks nice. And now what we need here is we don't only need the color picker, but we also need a corresponding namespace. That we only define the namespace for the token, but now we need to do it for the color picker. And how about we call it just WebC? I think that's a good name, right? So you go up here, you define your namespace like you would do for any other UI5 library that you're using, and instead of the library namespace, you give it the package name. In this case, it's UI5 Web Components. And then down here, you can do something like color picker. We save it, and then hopefully the live reload works as expected, and we go to our tab, and now you can see we have a fully fledged color picker, but it doesn't do a lot, right? So there's nothing happening. I mean, I can move it around and it looks cool. It changes the color, but there's no effect on it.
Well, it does a lot, but we don't use it so.
It does a lot, but we're going to use a bit of that because there's a couple of things that I want to talk about still. We're now, as I mentioned quite a number of times now, we're now on the UI5 control level. You can use everything that UI5 control tree gives to you, from aggregations to properties, like in this case, the text property, for example, but you can also use event handlers. And if I'm not mistaken, let me quickly look at the documentation. The color picker has an event called change. So that means we now also have in our UI5 control a change event. We can define that like we do with any other event in UI5. So I already implemented a little function called color change in our main controller to save us some time. And if I remember correctly, I also need to give this thing an ID because that's how I identify it in my controller, right? So from here on, again, we have the basic UI5 stuff, right? We can now use a reference with the dot syntax to our controller and bind event handlers automatically to this control and then the underlying web component. And now, if I didn't mess this up, we should be able to move around here and hopefully you can see it that the color of the buttons changes, right? So this is now eventually a live change event that we have registered on our color picker, and you can see a nice visual representation of the changes that are happening live in the DOM on those web components.
A new theme designer is born. Awesome.
A new, yeah, we should absolutely not ship that because I did a bit of dirty stuff. Maybe you saw the comments. So I'm using CSS variables to change the color, so that's not productively. You shouldn't do that. But I think it's a nice visual showcase that you can see that the UI5 event system is now fully connected from declarative to programmatic, and it just works very nicely out of the box. Yeah. So this is essentially what I want to show you. I hope I could walk you through to the very, in my opinion, simple steps, how you can integrate all of those things and how you can reuse essentially every web component in this package.
You can maybe also use a WebC panel around the color picker. Huh? You can just change it to a WebC panel. Absolutely. And then also the aggregation works.
Yep, that is a good idea. We can go off script here and do it on the fly. I think the property should be header text, but we can look this up. So this is the basic approach that anyone would take. So you go to the panel, look at property, you can see header text, and now since we have a live reload, we also have the expand interaction here available. So yep, that also works very nicely. So I mean, ideally you have a replacement for a SAPM control, and then you can just put WebC in front of it, and if the property names didn't change, it works as it did before. Yeah, that's essentially it. There's maybe one thing, if you have a bit time left, I can share something else. So what I have checked out here is our ecosystem repository, and there is a sample app in there that I can also just start and surf and quickly show you how it looks like, and then maybe Peter can post a link to that application in the chat and you can look how we did all of that, because there's a bit more going on. This is now a TypeScript-based application that has all the configurations you need for TypeScript support and this web component integration, and it's essentially a small playground that we use for testing stuff, right? So you can see there's a couple of things like avatars, there's a date range picker working where you can pick controls. There's a couple of live change events connected to this, so this is pretty cool. We have associations showcased how they work with popovers, etc. And if you want to look at a more complex example that doesn't even have one single line of JavaScript code, you can click on the dynamic page button here and you end up at the sample application that I copied over from the newly released Fiori package. So this is the dynamic page in the Fiori package of the web components. I just copied the example, adapted it slightly to UI5 XML view syntax, because that's obviously what you have to do. And then inside here, you see a data bound table with everything that is on offer here. Yeah, so this is essentially the bit bigger complex showcase. So if you want to have a look at this, you can find it here in the ecosystem. Yeah, I think that's all I have to show you.
Maybe we can show on also one more thing. If you go back to the application, if you use Control-Shift-Alt-S.
Yeah,
you know, I like that a lot.
Yeah, you like
emphasizes
our dialog.
Our support dialog with a control tree. Yep. And when we see also here these UI5 control wrappers for the web components, how they are reflected. So you see also there is inheritance chain that the MyUI5 token, it's inheriting from the web component base class, and you see all the properties here. You can modify these properties also in place here to play a little bit around with that for sure. This also works. You can switch the read-only flag, and also when there are, let's say, more hierarchy on that. I don't know whether the color picker is depending on another component. Can you click on that, or it's also based on the web component base class? No, I think for the date picker we have it in other places. You see then that the date picker is based on date picker base, so we also fully replicate the hierarchy. What the web components are doing, so they are also completely replicated for the UI5 control wrappers.
Maybe I can show it here. Okay, so as you can see, the date range picker extends the date picker in this case, and then there's another extension chain going to the date component base, and then you go up to the base web component class, and then to the UI5 control, and now you can see that all of this are essentially controls. Right, and as Peter mentioned, there are aggregations in place, right? Maybe if you want to showcase this for a moment, there is an avatar group up here. I think the rendering of the of the support dialog is not correct, but the avatar group aggregates avatars, right? So this is essentially these three small avatars. They are rendered inside an avatar group, and avatar group has a typing. So if we open this again, we should see that the typing of the avatar group uses a certain interface, right? So we have the full UI5 type system support for things like aggregations and interfaces, etc.
Honestly, when now for everyone, what we have seen at the UI5Con keynote this year, this was more from a solution, more runtime solution, and the cool innovation of that, what we have all done over the last couple of months, is now that everything which is happening is now happening at a build or in this development server time. So for the UI5 runtime, a web component is not anymore any different thing than just the UI5 controller. So it really is tightly and natively integrated in SAP UI5, and there is, let's say, not really any runtime layer necessary to bring that together, and this is really the clue. So the web components really are a first-class citizen, as I promised, of the UI5 framework, and this is where we want to go.
And to mention that this also replaces the WebC libraries that we had for some time in SAP UI5. So we had some hard-coded wrappers, so to say, for the web components, and they are like going away again, and this approach is like the future. But there's a question also by Simon. So the question is, can we already prefer the existing UI5 web components over the standard UI5 controls from the demo kit? Or is it officially still experimental?
Technically, all these components, like the web components and this UI5 tooling modules, they are officially available. So let's say for standalone applications, which are not running in the Launchpad, where you have the M controls also used, it's an option that you can make use of these components also for your development. But for sure, if you are running or if you're developing apps which are integrating back into a Launchpad environment, still it's at the moment a better option to use here the SAP M controls. Otherwise, you would load both components, and this is an overhead. But in principle, if you see a UI5 web component where you don't have like a representative UI5 control, then you could do this. Yeah, that's also the point for new components. We anyhow start to build them only as web components. That's one thing are the AI components. We have them, Thorsten, if you go to the components in the demo kit, there are the AI components already in. And these components, they will be only developed as web components, and we ensure to integrate them back via the seamless web component approach into UI5. Yeah. And so it's also, that's the reason why this whole seamless web component topic is such important for us to benefit from one code base for the future. And it's also for us, from a development perspective, more efficient to develop one component just once. Maybe one additional question, or just to clarify, I mean, what I saw now in the demo is that we have a dependency to the tooling and a specific version.
But is there also a specific version necessary for UI5?
Yeah, for the UI5 runtime, we needed at least 117 is the min version because the Web Components base class is in. So if you are having the LTS version 120, you are good to go. And from then on, you could seamlessly use the UI5 tooling modules in combination with the SAP UI5 or Open UI5 runtime to integrate these web components. But as I said, if you have SAP M components already loaded, this makes not much sense, except if these components are not available, or if this web component is not available in our classic library set, then you definitely can also use that to integrate them.
Maybe one last question. Maybe it's a philosophical one. Let's see what our architect's saying. Now that we have the option to integrate UI5 Web Components, and now we also saw how it works, what is your recommendation? If I need a new one, should I use still the classic way to create UI5 controls, or should I go via UI5 Web Components? Or when to use what?
Internally at SAP, we have the guidance that everything that is new and you build newly is created as a web component. Exactly because of this cross-technology aspect, so that we have it then everywhere. And for all kind of acquisitions or new customers that might come up, if you are, let's say, totally sure this is not a strong argument, or maybe then Peter can now say something technical on it. But yeah, I think from an SAP perspective, we want to follow our role model. Web components would be the way to go.
I just want to bring in one thing because that's really in my mind. If it's just the control you need for as a kind of a helper for you to bring that in, like define a circle or something else, then maybe this would be easier to implement this just as a control. But if it's really like developing a bigger UI element and want to make a reuse, then I would go for the web component, because then the overhead of having a separate project where you develop that and even have it later on reusable across different technologies, and as a native component available, this makes more sense for me. Yeah. So for me, it's from a future perspective, for sure, the better way to develop it, a real UI element as a web component, and then to integrate it back.
But also depends a bit on whether there will be any reuse of native HTML elements like web components. If you anyway just build certainly only UI5, then you could use the existing knowledge or maybe some code you have already there.
Yeah, let's see how good we can connect in future, even the development models. So maybe this also goes more smooth together in the future. That's something where from web components and SAP UI5 side, we need to look how to combine the toolings maybe better. And then that it's more tight integrated, also feels that seamless. And then it will also melt there, let's say the difference on this having these two projects.
And also this kind of the fun factor and learning something new. So web components is a web standard, so maybe if you like it, do it, right?
And the control framework will not go away because it's the foundation of the web component integration.
Thanks for your opinion on this, because I think this is really what people will question themselves maybe when they see this. Unfortunately, we have to close right now, because I think we could talk a bit more about all the strategies around control development and so on. But let's see, maybe in another session then. So I would close this session for today. Have a great evening, day, whatever, and hopefully seeing you all back in November. Saying bye.
Yeah, see you then. Take care. Bye.